Greetings everybody, hope you're all doing well out there. My name is Zach, I lead the youth group at St Mary's and it's a privilege to be bringing your sermon today to guide you through house churches as we continue to gather in this lockdown period, coming to you from a very windy and rainy Sunday afternoon in Karori, and just all the very best in your own bubbles as we continue to gather and do life together despite the crazy circumstances. I'm bubbling here with the rest of the AYM team at St Mary's, and we're all doing very well, even if in need of a slight haircut, many of us. Today we are continuing our journey through the post-resurrection encounters of Jesus with his disciples. And today we're looking at the story from John 21, 1 to 14, which is the story of the miraculous catch of fish. I'm going to read the passage out before sharing a few standouts for me from the story. And I'm sure you guys will also have a lot of great insights in your own church gatherings throughout the week. So this is from the New International Version, John 21, 1 to 14. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others were going together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them. And they said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat. But that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. He said, throw your net onto the right side of the boat, and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the fish of net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, but they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there, with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have just caught. Simon Peter climbed aboard and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. There were a few standouts for me from this passage. What I'm going to do is just share those with you and see where we can get to. The first thing that struck me about this passage was the fact that when things are frustrating, just as they were for the disciples here, Jesus gives us a fresh invitation to do things in a different and in a new way. We see that in the story where Jesus calls to the disciples from the shore. He directs them clearly to switch to the other side of the boat, to switch up what they were doing in order to find what they were looking for. Often I think our life changes in patterns. We go through cycles. Some are marked with productivity, where things go exactly how we wanted to, but often they're marked with uncertainty and frustration. And I think this is a very important thing to think about at the moment in this COVID situation. It feels like one of those times where we're not in control, we don't know what's happening, and often they can be quite frustrating. It's such an important time during these moments to pause and listen to Jesus, see what he's directing us to or what he's redirecting us to. Often taking feedback isn't easy, or it's not the most pleasant or fun thing to get. And I can imagine when Jesus first called out to them, that's what the fishermen, the disciples, were feeling too. We know that before they were disciples and they went with Jesus for those 3 years, they were professional fishermen. And after a hard night of toiling and unable to catch any fish, it can't have been much fun being told that they were doing it wrong by some heckler from the shoreline. I think I can relate to any frustrations they might have been feeling in that moment. In lockdown, I've been getting into online chess a little bit to help pass the time and try and pick up a new skill. And after a few weeks, I was getting pretty confident. I was liking my skills, and I knew that one of my younger cousins, who's about 12 or 13, I was a big chess fan, so I challenged him to a game online. Unfortunately, it didn't go quite according to plan, and after 2.5 minutes, I'd been soundly beaten. As if that wasn't enough, he then called me and gave me a few tips as to how to improve my game, which did not endear me to play any more chess since then. But the point being, humility is sometimes very important and quite hard to take. Being told that we're doing it wrong or that we're not quite aligned right is so important but so hard to take. We know though when Jesus calls us to take on feedback, to redirect what we're doing, to put our nets out on the other side of the boat, that he is always going to be gracious with us. He always wants the best for us, and he knows what we want and what we need. I think that such a big challenge, in our world, the way we roll, often we move so quickly, often we can miss those invitations. Our world is so full of noise, it moves so quickly. And I think realising something over the past few weeks with the slower pace of life, and noting how eerily quiet the streets have been, how bombarded with noise we are most of the time. And it reminded me how kind of countercultural Jesus' messages always are, and actually the invitation to listen, to be quiet, to be still, and hear correction from Jesus is something that we don't take too easily and isn't attuned with what our culture usually tells us to do. Often in our lives we hit brick walls, and it's often really important for us to take those opportunities instead of ploughing on or getting frustrated or trying to fix our problems ourselves, to take time to pause, to listen to Jesus and see what he is calling us to do, what he is calling us to change. There's a space of great humility and great quiet that we need to be entering into with God. So in order for us to become present, to be deliberate about making space to hear, instead of jumping the gun, being in our own ways, and coming up with the same frustrating results, we need to trust that Jesus will speak to us, that he will speak to us, and when he does, that there's trust in the goodness of what he wants, even if it's calling for us to change how we're doing things. The second standout from the story for me was that Jesus came and met the disciples in their ordinariness, and he comes to meet us in our ordinariness too. I can only imagine how uncertain this post-resurrection era was for the disciples. We've heard in the last couple of weeks about these brief and powerful encounters that they have with the risen Christ. However, they were still in such a state of lurch, not knowing what their lives were going to look like going forward. And we see here that they'd actually gone back to their old lives, to gone back to fishermen, which is what they were doing before they went with Jesus. And there was still probably so much uncertainty within them of knowing what those 3 years with Jesus meant. What were they good for? What was going to happen now? What was it all about? And you can imagine as well how hard it would have been for them going back to their old fishing town, seeing all the same people that they'd grown up with. And I'm sure there was more than one snarky comment from other fishermen about, what happened with that rabbi and what was working out. And obviously it hadn't gone quite as planned. And that sort of attitude kind of helped the disciples as they kind of were left wondering whether or not it was just all a big mistake with Jesus. At Jerusalem, where the crucifixion and the resurrection encounters had happened earlier, it was also grand. There was so much excitement and so much going on. And then transitioned from that into a sleepy, small Galilean town that they'd probably grown up with. And it was another big life adjustment, a big shake-up for the disciples. But yet, in this place of uncertainty, as they go back towards their monotonous and ordinary everyday lives, that Jesus comes to meet with them again. Often it's when those moments when we're trying to get back into our daily lives, into our rhythms, that Jesus shows up in our midst and wants to meet with us. I'm sure many of you can relate to this, but I'm quite task-orientated. I feel like every morning when I wake up, I'm hit with a list of things that I know I need to get done that day. And at the end of the day, success will be judged on how many of those things I manage to get through. And while that's good for getting stuff done and helpful to get in that zone, often that means I close myself out to anything else. And I think this is a trap that we can fall into a lot of the time. When we become so task-orientated, so focused on what we're doing and making sure we can get it done as quickly as we can become very narrow-minded and miss the opportunities and invitations that exist. I read this book a few weeks ago which struck me. Many of you would have heard of it. It's called The Practice of the Presence of God. And it's about a 17th century monk in France known as Brother Lawrence. And he became very famous in his local area for the holiness and dedication to God that he brought to everyday life, to the small mundane activities that he engaged in. People flocked to the monastery in which he lived and worked just to watch him do simple tasks such as sweeping the floor or doing the dishes. Such was his joy in God and commitment to fellowship with God through everything that he did. I think there's a really good challenge for us in this idea. Every day, Jesus is calling to us from the shore as he was to the disciples when we are least expecting him. When we're working, going about our ordinary tasks, ticking off our check boxes, getting things done, we need to be mindful of whether or not we're leaving enough room in our lives, enough room in our hearts to allow Jesus to come and commune with us, to be with us and to speak to us. Because it's in those moments when we're focused on something else, when we're least expecting it, just like it was for the disciples, that's when Jesus wants to come and to meet with us. The final thing from the story that stands out to me is that Jesus' invitation to us, just it was to the disciples there, is towards communion and fellowship first. I think the story offers a really important clue as to how Jesus wants to relate with us and what that relationship looks like to him. The story, just like many others, I think, offers just as much clues about Jesus and his character from the manner and the way that he engages with us, his people, more than what he actually says. Strikes me a lot that throughout how many gospel stories this story included, that Jesus builds the relationships around a meal, around gathering together and eating together. We see that there's no urgency from Jesus to get on with the tasks at hand. There's no grand agenda that he's working through. He's just gathering and having dinner with, or having breakfast rather, with his friends. This reminded me of a personal story. A few years ago, I just finished my first year of law school in Wellington, and I had a big exam period when I was very exhausted. And straight after my last exam, I jumped on a plane and flew up to Hamilton, which is where my family lived at the time. And when I got home, I remember walking in and there was so much warmth and a lovely roast dinner that was lying out in front of me. This was very exciting, not just because I'd spent the last couple of months living on a student diet of 2-minute noodles, but also because of the love and care that had gone into preparing this meal and the hospitality that lay ahead of me that I could just enter into. That dinner and that feeling of being loved and that feeling of hospitality and warmth meant so much more to me than whatever conversations we had that night. I think God's invitation to us often works in a very similar way. God is inviting us when we're tired and when we are weary. Maybe we've had a big night out fishing, we're cold, we're frustrated, and we haven't caught anything. Yet Jesus' invitation is to warmth. Its invitation is to relationship. He's sitting there on the shore, encouraging us, cooking up a meal for us. The invitation is to relationship, to be with us together. And it's from that abundance, that rest, and that joy of relationship that we can then go out with Jesus and partner with him in the world and help bring his kingdom. God doesn't start with a list of meeting notes or things that he wants to get through. Jesus wasn't sitting there on the shore with a big game plan as to how it was going to work after. We will get there, and he does get there later on in the stories. However, the first invitation is always of relationship. It's always towards communion, and it's always towards being together. First, God always calls us to just be with him before we start doing. Those are the 3 things that stood out to me from that passage. Been a real privilege to share with you this morning, and I hope that you all have a great week in your bubbles. Looking forward to gathering together as church in a building soon. God bless.